Hello and welcome to another edition of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host on the weekends for this new format going forward, Jake Daly, joined by my co-host, good friend, Meira Fatemi. We're got a good show for you today. I'm going to go over, first off, the big time house settlement coming down from the NCAA going to change the landscape of college sports forever. We're going to dive into that. We're also going to dive into the NBA Finals. Going to give our Game 2 outlook after that absolutely insane Game 1. After we saw the Halliburton Magic strike again, we're going to talk about Game 2 and what we can maybe expect. We're also going to talk a little NFL today. We're going to look at the NFC North and kind of how that division's going to be shaking out. It's going to be really interesting. There's kind of a lot of contenders there in the Lions, in the Packers, in the Vikings, and potentially the Chicago Bears as well. Going to be a lot of fun. We're also going to dive into the Stanley Cup as well as the UFC later on in the show, so make sure you stick around for that. But first, before I get into anything else, I just want to remind everybody that this show is all about you. We love hearing your comments, your questions, your insights, your opinions, your hot takes, whatever you got. We want to hear it. We want to make this show as interactive, as exciting as possible. Now, one easy way to do that, if you're on YouTube, you can use the Super Chat feature. To use the Super Chat feature, all you have to do is click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box, type in your message there, send that in. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, gets read live, and it's also just a great way to support our channel. If YouTube's not your thing, if Super Chat's not your thing, you can also go to gsmcpodcast.net to use that link there to tip or donate. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Now, Miram, let's talk a little bit about this house settlement. Officially finally coming down. Universities allowed to pay college athletes for the first time. What are your kind of overall thoughts about this when it first kind of came out? No, I think it's certainly going to be interesting kind of how we see these NIL collectives take shape after the revenue sharing takes place. We're not going to be able to see kind of these renegade boosters, these John Reeses of the world that can give 15, $20 million to a Miami football program just to kind of pay these players. They're not going to be allowed with this new clearinghouse, too, that's going to be involved in this house settlement, um, powered by Deloitte. It's going to be dubbed NIL Go, and they've kind of said that pretty much everything over $600 is going to be under a lot of scrutiny from third-party NIL deals. They also said that a lot of those third-party NIL deals, about 90% of them, they probably would not have selected at one point. So I think that's going to be interesting too. Is what are we going to see with the NIL kind of landscape? Um, are we going to see these guys getting $2.5 million a year anymore? I think that's going to be kind of interesting too. What do you think about that? I think a big issue too with kind of the group of five teams is how are they going to raise these funds, right? A lot of you look at kind of max schools, like Kent State and Akron, schools that are already struggling financially, albeit just as a university. How are they going to kind of be able to raise enough money? I think that's going to be interesting. Yes, there's a $28.5 million cap, but they don't necessarily have to spend that much money. But if you're looking at these power schools, they obviously have the $20.5 million to spend for revenue. When you look at a smaller program, are they going to be able to kind of keep pace? I think that's a kind of a big question mark. Yeah, and we are going to dive into kind of the scholarship aspect later on in the show. Um, One thing I kind of want to look at here, though, is thinking about some of when you're looking at how these schools kind of divvy up this revenue. Big East basketball. Think about it. They don't have that. I mean, a lot of those schools have football programs, but they're playing in kind of the Patriot League, FCS level football. You're not going to pay your football players. You could pretty much, in theory, put all $20.5 million towards building a superstar basketball team in the Big East. What do you kind of think about that? I mean, think of like a Rick Pitino at St. John's with $20.5 million to build a basketball roster. I think with college basketball though too, it's going to be interesting to kind of see does a school like Texas Tech or Baylor, where do they kind of draw the line in divvying up money between football or men's basketball, right? Those are two schools that have had really successful men's basketball programs. A lot of those Big 12 programs. So if you're going to give a lot of these schools kind of sounds like they're going to follow a plan where pretty much 75% of this revenue is going to go to football. If you're looking at that, I mean, where's that going to go? Who's going to actually spend money on basketball? I think it's going to be interesting. I think some of these schools might have to kind of pick and choose an avenue. There's going to be a fork in the road where they go, okay, we're going to go all in on football or we're going to go all in on basketball and maybe some of these other sports too. Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting too, especially when you think about kind of programs such as Duke, who Duke hired a new head coach in football, and Manny Diaz led them to a 9-win season last year, kind of coming up on the up and up in terms of as a football program. Obviously, historically regarded as a heavy basketball school, right? When we think of Duke, what do you think of Coach K and all those guys that went there? But this is a school on the rise in football. Are they going to try to divvy up more money to the football program to kind of keep pace in this new world? Or are they going to kind of just give up on football and say, no, we're going to give our $20.5 million to basketball, to men's basketball, and that's just going to be our thing. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of which schools pick a certain avenue. Sounds like a lot of them are kind of following a certain model where they're going to go 75% football, 25% men's basketball, and then kind of divvy it up across baseball, women's basketball, stuff like that. Um, but I think that's really intriguing. Do we see a school like North Carolina, too, still staying in the state, but they just hired Bill Belichick? I mean, arguably the greatest football head coach ever of all time. So are you going to. Right? You think of the Butlers, Villanova, all of those schools. They're not gonna give their money to football. So can they just go and go? Here's 2.5 million for our point guard. Here's two. You get this. You get this. Kind of like Oprah. It's like you get $1 million. You get like it's certainly very possible though. I mean, you think of like St. John's, Villanova. Like they're not gonna give money to football. There's no point. Here's also though where I think this is interesting too is kind of to your point about women's lacrosse stuff like that. Um, are they actually valued highly in terms of NIL and stuff like that? So does that kind of have a trickle down effect where because of they may not be highly valued in terms of NIL, you don't really have to pay them that much either. You see what I'm saying? I don't know. What do you think about that? Yeah. And speaking of smaller sports, when we kind of talk about some of those Olympic sports, stuff like that, one of the big changes here in the House settlement is the scholarship limits. We're going to dive a little more into that after we take a short break. Um, we're going to be back on the GSMC Sports Podcast. Stick around, stay tuned. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am having some technical difficulties right now at the moment, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to stay tuned. We're going to move on to kind of this next topic, staying on kind of the same task of the NCAA and scholarship limits. So when we kind of discuss this whole thing, it's really kind of interesting, these scholarship limits and what's going to happen here. But we are going to discuss that in 1 minute. We will be back shortly. I apologize for the quick break, but stay tuned on the GSMC Sports Podcast.